Substance-induced psychosis is more common than you'd think, and while a person may not have a psychotic disorder, they can still have psychosis from substance use. Many drugs can induce psychosis, including alcohol, cannabis, cocaine, amphetamines, methamphetamines, PCP, GHB, psychedelic drugs such as LSD and mushrooms, club drugs such as ecstasy and MDMA, pretty much everything, including medication. While this form of psychosis can happen while a person is under the influence of a substance, it can also happen while a person is going through withdrawals. These symptoms can come on gradually over an extended period of drug use, and they can also happen immediately with first-time users who take too much of a dose. With the long-term use, it typically sets on when a person begins to detox and come off of their substance. Symptoms are more likely to occur in people who have a pre-existing psychiatric disorder, and other risk factors include the drug potency, the drug quality, and how much is used. These symptoms can be short-term or long-term. The long-term substance-induced psychosis is often referred to as chronic substance-induced psychosis, and this can have a person have a higher probability of developing schizophrenia later in life. Substance-induced psychosis doesn't necessarily have an endpoint because someone may not realize that their drug use is what's causing the psychosis, and the sustained drug use will sustain the psychosis. However, these episodes tend to be shorter than those of people who have psychotic disorders. Symptoms may last days or weeks, or for people who have chronic substance-induced psychosis, they can last for months or even years after the drug use is stopped. Some cases of substance-induced psychosis may resolve after the substance use is stopped. Some cases will need medication and treatment to be resolved. This type of psychosis can be prevented by understanding a drug's side effects and addiction potential. But the only foolproof way to prevent drug-induced psychosis is through abstinence of drug use. I know how incredibly hard it can be to deal with drug-induced psychosis or substance-induced psychosis because while I have a psychotic disorder that has naturally occurring episodes when I'm not medicated, I have had drug-induced episodes. And as a recovering addict, I must say that the hardest challenge in treating my psychotic disorder was just not being able to stop using drugs. So it's really hard when you want to put your mental health first and you are terrified of having an episode and going back to that traumatic place, but choosing the drug over it. And people may not understand why you would do that to yourself. It's easy to look at addicts and think, why are you making that choice? And what is not understood is that with addicts, at a point, we lose the choice over controlling the compulsion, and we will throw our lives away for that fix. So if you struggle with substance-induced psychosis, I really feel for you. I know how hard it is to break that cycle. It is torturous. It is so challenging. It is one of the hardest things I've ever done, quitting drugs. And you are worth it. You can do it. You absolutely can recover, and you may not get it today, you may not get it this month, but just keep trying. Your health is more important than your addiction. I'm gonna go ahead and throw a trigger warning on this video because it has some unsettling themes that maybe not everyone is on board with. So if you're not interested in hearing about death, dying, or bodily harm, I would suggest swiping. So Cotard's delusion, or also called Cotard syndrome or walking corpse syndrome, is a delusion in which a person believes that they are dead, or they are dying, or they don't exist, or that their organs are putrefying, they're missing organs, they're missing blood, they're missing limbs. It's really grim, and it's a horrible thing to experience. Basically, it's a delusion that's characterized by very, very strong denial of your own existence, denial of portions of your body, denial of certain body parts, and in a broader sense, a denial of the nature of the world around you. It prevents a person from making sense of the external world around them, and this causes a distorted image of what the world really is like. So their world might become very dull and flat and emotionless and kind of cut off from the rest of reality. Or you could believe that you were in hell because, you know, when you're dead, you could go to hell. And a lot of people also believe in that as their reality. People with Cotard's delusion can become very withdrawn, and they can neglect their personal hygiene and their personal physical health. They tend to withdraw from the people in their lives. They kind of like give up on taking care of their needs because they don't have needs when they're dead. My experience with Cotards has been multifaceted, and I've had a lot of varying kinds of that delusion. I thought I was dead a lot, and when I was dead, I believed that everyone around me was also dead. That's another way that you could experience it, is believing that not only are you dead, but everyone else is dead. And when I was dead, I was super depressed, and I felt no motivation to do anything in my life because I really didn't have to do things since I was dead. I also believed that I was dying, and I died many different kinds of deaths. I died by being on fire and burning to death. So I felt that experience of seeing myself covered in flames and actively dying, and then kind of accepting my fate, then being dead. I believed that I had been hanged. I believed that I had been poisoned. I believed that I had been buried alive. So I remember what it was like to have those thoughts of how you would feel before you die, of, oh my God, I'm dying, and then accepting my fate. It's a really scary thing to feel yourself dying. Oh God, it's like really enforced my fear of death. I also would at times be missing limbs. I would be missing my left arm. I would be missing my left leg. And even though I could use those limbs, I didn't believe that they were there. And I would say, tuck my arm into my jacket and not use it. And it's so strange, but it's almost as if I could look and see it physically and not believe that it was real. Kind of like having a dead limb, like seeing this dead part of myself that was attached to my living body, and it was essentially rotting away. So that's been my experience with Cotard's delusion, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. I wouldn't wish psychosis in general on anyone, but like particularly delusions like this. Delusions can be really violent. They can be very traumatizing. I carry a lot of trauma from delusions like this and others. So when people like don't understand what we're going through, this is just a taste of just how bad it can be. Psychosis doesn't necessarily have to be bad for everyone, but for some of us, it really is traumatizing. Let's talk about postpartum psychosis. Postpartum psychosis is a loss of touch with reality after childbirth. It is the most severe of postpartum psychiatric disorders and affects 1 to 2 out of every 1,000 women after birth. Onset symptoms are typically within the first 48 to 72 hours after childbirth, but they can also happen up to 6 weeks later. Aside from hallucinations and delusions, symptoms can include mood changes such as mania, hypomania, or depression, irritability, insomnia, depersonalization and derealization, and thoughts of self-harm or harming others, especially the baby. There are 3 types of postpartum psychosis, or PPP, and those are manic, depressive, and mixed/atypical. The depressive type is the most common type, making up over 40% of all cases. The rate of harm to a child with this subtype is 4.5%, making it 4 or 5 times greater than with the other subtypes, and the rate of suicide is 5%. And the symptoms associated with the depressive subtype in particular are feelings of depression, feelings of guilt, anxiety or panic, lack of appetite, insomnia, lack of pleasure in the things that they love, thoughts of self-harm, suicide, or harming their child. The manic type is the next most common type, affecting 34% of all cases of PPP. The risk of self-harm or harm to a child is lower with this subtype, but still possible at 1%. The symptoms associated with the manic subtype are agitation or irritability, aggressive or disruptive behavior, talking more or faster than usual, needing less sleep, and delusions of grandeur. And finally, the atypical mixed type makes up about 25% of cases, and this can be a mix of the manic and depressive symptoms of the other subtypes. The symptoms associated with this subtype are disorganized speaking or behavior, disorientation or confusion, disturbance of consciousness where a person doesn't seem to be awake or aware of what's happening around them, inappropriate comments, behaviors, or emotional displays, such as laughing at something traumatic, like not having the appropriate feelings you would in like a grave situation, and catatonia or mutism. This is most common with people who have just given birth to their first child, but for people with a history of PPP, there is a 30 to 50% chance that it will happen again with their future childbirths. PPP can be caused by a number of things. About a third of people who have PPP already have an underlying mental health condition, bipolar type 1 being the most common. Other disorders that increase the risk of PPP are major depressive disorder and schizophrenia spectrum disorders. Also, people with PPP often have a family history of members of their family having had PPP or other mental health disorders. It can also be affected by lack of sleep, hormone changes from pregnancy, and other medical conditions, including autoimmune diseases, electrolyte imbalances, vitamin deficiencies, thyroid disorders, stroke, and eclampsia or preeclampsia. Because PPP is a mental health emergency, people with this condition do need inpatient care, and this can often be involuntary because of their lack of awareness of their own symptoms. A lot of times people with psychosis, PPP in particular, do not have an awareness, and so they need the care of others to help them get the treatment they deserve. Fortunately, this condition is reversible, and treatment in the form of medications like antipsychotics and mood stabilizers or even electroconvulsive therapy are effective in essentially ending the episode. However, a lot of people who have PPP do go on to develop bipolar disorder. So it is temporary, and people typically recover within a few weeks, though some can take from 6 months to a year. It is dependent on the treatment that you get, and when you get your treatment, psychosis can be a wild ride, and I don't think a lot of people realize going into their pregnancy that this could be a possible risk. So with like the knowledge that you have a family history of mental illness, or that you yourself have mental illness, or if you even suspect you have a mental illness and you aren't diagnosed, it's so important to get in touch with a doctor and work through your pregnancy plan and have a battle plan for in the event that this could happen. A lot of people with schizophrenia or other mental illnesses can have happy, healthy families and give birth and be completely successful parents. It is not this life sentence, death sentence, whatever, where you have to give up on things like family because of your illness. So I really hope this video can help women who maybe have felt alone in their pregnancy journey or have felt scared to understand that your mental illness does not define you as a parent, and whatever feelings you had coming into your postpartum, whether they be depression or psychosis, just know that that is not a reflection of your parenting, and it's okay to have mental illness after childbirth. In fact, it's perfectly normal, and you deserve care. So go treat yourself, mama. Religious delusions, also known as religiosity and religious preoccupation. These are delusions related to whatever whatever religion tends to be predominant in a person's country, and you don't necessarily have to have a religious background to have these delusions. In fact, religiosity and religion should definitely not be compared because they're nothing at all alike. They don't actually have as much in common as you'd think. So religion and spiritual beliefs are founded in a person's faith. They're founded in a person's belief system. But delusions take that a step further because delusions are false beliefs. So while a person maybe has religious beliefs outside of psychosis, in psychosis, those delusions, they tend not to be reflected by like what this person actually believes. So while they may have some experience with religion and they may have their own formal beliefs, the beliefs they have with delusions are false. That's not really how they feel about their own personal beliefs. A lot of people mistake religious delusions for actual religious beliefs, and they tend to think that those of us who experience psychosis, who have religious beliefs, are genuinely religious. And that's not true. A lot of people may be atheist, may be agnostic, may have even a totally different religion, and that is not actually how this person feels. So blaming psychosis on the church is, it's kind of silly because these people, a lot of them who experience these delusions, don't believe in the church to begin with. I'll just share with you a few examples of my own religious delusions because I can't speak for everyone, but I sure as hell can speak for myself. I've had delusions of being pregnant with the Antichrist. I've had delusions of being followed by a nun. I've had delusions, or rather that was a hallucination, but that can be associated with these delusions too. Like you could hear the voice of God or hear angels talking to you. I've believed I was Jesus. I've also believed I was the Antichrist. I've believed that I was possessed by demons and I wanted to have an exorcism. And these are not actually like how I feel. I am a pretty spiritual person, but that's more in the sense of like, if you do good, good will be reflected back to you, that kind of stuff. I am by no means actually the kind of person who believes in demonic possession. That's just something that my mind cooked up for me. You have to understand that delusions tend to be made up of a person's experiences and what they absorb around them. A lot of my delusions and hallucinations come from books and TV shows and lyrics to music, stuff like that. So in, say, a predominantly Christian society, which we seem to have here in the US, there's a lot of in God we trust kind of stuff going on here. It would be more common to have religious delusions related to Christianity, even if you weren't Christian. And that's in large part because it's all around this society and it's such a huge part of this culture. We celebrate religious holidays like Easter and Christmas. Even people who aren't Christian celebrate Christmas. It's not even like, it's not personal, right? It doesn't have as much to do with the actual person as you think. It doesn't even have as much to do with religion as you think. It's an influence, just like politics can be an influence. And another common delusion can be a political delusion of thinking that you've rigged the election, you're somehow behind the results of the election, or you will be the next president, or you're being like followed by like the Secret Service, or even that the president loves you. I used to think that I was Stormy Daniels. I'm not Stormy Daniels, but she was all over the news during one of my episodes, so naturally that influenced one of my delusions. So see, it's not inherently religious. It's not reflected by a person's actual religious beliefs, whether they have any or not. It's a false belief. And it just happens to be one of the more prevalent ones. It tends to affect about 50% of psychosis cases in the US. and that fluctuates from country to country. It might be higher or lower in other countries. Actually, it's indicative of a poorer prognosis. Like people who have religious delusions tend to have more severe cases and longer episodes. But again, none of this actually means that a person themselves is religious. It's a delusion. It's not real. It's just not real.